Tonight's episode of the weekly Roundup will be brought to you by the Losman. However, I will be doing the introduction for this evening. I am Reginald T. Skellington. I am the actual face of Losman.com. You may recognize me from the website that's been out since 1996 and then went defunct all those years ago. But that's okay, because I am back, and I will be assisting the Losman in putting together a list and compilation of some outstanding classic horror films. But before we do that, I will bring you the Losman as we present this week's weekly roundup. Howdy, y'all. Losman here, and little persona there, having some fun with some Halloween masks. Well, basically, what we have tonight is 32 days till Halloween, and of course, this is the weekly, my Losman's weekly lazy roundup because it's Sunday, and Sunday means much to do. No, for the past couple hours, I was having a little fun doing doing a little watch party on some classic movies with Sid Haig. Since he passed away last week, and we wanted to honor Sid Haig, so we watched Spider Baby and Death House. Spider Baby, which, if you're not familiar, is an early film that has Sid Haig in it. It goes all the way back to the mid 1960s. It has Lawton Chaney Jr. in it, who, if you're not familiar, is the Wolfman from the classic Universal movies. It is a crazy movie. It's it's really out there. Even by the 1960s standards. So, if you really want to watch it, it's a great movie. It's just really strange. And as for Death House, okay, I'm not going to go any further on that one. But, okay. So, as this week went through, I did watch a few movies. I did talk about Spider Baby. I'm going to talk about some other movies that I watched this week. I watched a movie called One Cut of the Dead, which you can watch now on Shudder. And I am not going to describe this movie too much other than to say, watch this movie. It is, without a doubt, one of the best zombie horror comedies since maybe even Shaun of the Dead. Now, that's quite a statement. And once you watch this movie, you will agree. It is Japanese. It is subtitled. So if you're not fond of subtitles, I'm going to have to tell you, just grin and bear it. It's a great movie. It's 90 minutes or so. Just watch the movie. The subtitles are there, make you pay attention to the plot. But it's truly a movie that needs to be watched to be appreciated. You really should watch this movie. And I give it the maximum recommendation. It's probably one of the best movies I've seen all year. And I've seen some great movies and I've seen some garbage. But this is definitely, cream of the crop. That's for sure. Okay, another movie I watched last night, actually a couple of nights ago probably, was The Monster Project. Now, The Monster Project was a film that I have been seeing on my queue for quite some time, but I never really got around to it. It involves a young filmmaker who does YouTube videos. Like a lot of people on YouTube, you want to get a presence out there. You want to get a following. Gee, what's that about? And so he decides that what he wants to do is do something cool, something realistic, something that will basically stand out. So he takes out a Craigslist ad and he searches for people who claim to be monsters in real life. So that way he can interview figure out if these people are kind of out there, if they're batshit, or if they maybe they are a little of what they say they are. So he gets a film team together in a creepy old house, because it's got to be a creepy old house, and he has the three of them show up so that way he can conduct interviews, find out what's going on. Yeah. Let's just say that these people are exactly who they say they are. So, it's not a super great movie, but it's entertaining. Personally, I felt the movie was a little paced. Could have been paced a little better, but I did like the premise, and the creature effects are pretty badass. So it's not a complete waste of time, and it's actually an entertaining movie. Whatever flaws it may have, hey, you might be able to work through them as best you can. So not too bad. Now, I know the other day I was when I was doing trivia. Usually, what I'll do is there's a Half Price Books right next door to the pub I go to, and I went in there, because sometimes I'm like looking for movies, and sometimes I'll find something. I found the ultimate treasure. Let the Right One In. If you're not familiar with Let the Right One In, it is probably one of the best vampire movies of this millennium. Well, past 2 decades, I guess you can put. It is a brilliant movie from Sweden, I believe, and it does tell a really good story. A young boy, he's kind of a latchkey kid. It's like we used to use that term. Basically, they really don't talk about, or they don't really show his parents very much. But he basically stays alone a good portion of the time, and he's bullied at school, because that's what happens in school. And he meets this young girl who's roughly his age, and they bond, and they become friends. The only thing is she's hiding a secret, and in time she will reveal that secret to him as he gets closer to her, and it is an amazing movie. It is definitely one of the best horror movies of the past 20 years. It's in my top 10 for sure. It's of this, past decade or 2 decades. And it is definitely one of my favorite vampire movies ever made. Now, there was a remake made in the United States because, why, instead of releasing the original movie and having to read subtitles, they decided to make a remake, which isn't too bad, though. It has Chloe Grace Moretz in it, and it's actually not bad. It's actually, the movie is basically identical to the film. Now, of course, they changed the setting to, the United States instead of Sweden, and a few changes here and there, but it's generally the same story. Young bullied kid, meets a pretty girl who his age, but then she's hiding a secret. So, not bad. It's one of the rare instances when an American remake is almost as good as the original. And let me emphasize almost. Let the Right One In is like a 5-star movie, whereas Let Me In, which is the American version, is a 4-star movie. Both of them are great movies, and if you've seen Let Me In, try Let the Right One In. Just to get a feel for what the original film is like. It's great. It's brilliant. It's an awesome film. Now, I guess when I was doing my lists, of course I've been doing my lists, 100 lists, yes, that's a lot of lists. I'm starting to wind down on the topics, and I'm starting to get to the more complicated ones I'm going to be featuring over the next month, which is going to be, October, which is Halloween, which is coming up in the next, few days. We're going to be like about 32 days away from Halloween. So I'm going to start getting a little more interesting on the list I'm going to do. So I decided, when I was working on the list, to put on some movies, and I decided to look up one of my favorite films of all time. It is a movie called Repo Man. Now, Repo Man's not a horror movie. It is a cult movie. And it is definitely one of the best cult movies of all time. The movie is from, I believe, 1984. It stars Emilio Estevez, Harry Dean Stanton, and it is an incredibly odd movie. The premise is that Emilio Estevez plays a young, punk kid, with little ambition, and he somehow gets recruited into the world of auto repossession. Now, being a repo man's kind of an odd industry, because you're essentially a car thief, with the purpose of reclaiming vehicles that aren't, they're not getting payments on. So along the way, he meets the different repo men, which, strangely enough, they're all named for beers. So he meets a man named Light, another guy named Miller, someone named Bud, and that was on purpose, something fun and simple. And along the way, he learns the Repo Man code, and he, gets real close to Harry Dean Stanton's character, who kind of gives him the ropes and sees him as a little protege. He basically wants to teach him everything that he needs to know about, this weird and wacky world. So, of course, in the movie, one of the driving elements of the film is that there's this old car that's basically being sought after. It's like an old Chevy from the 1960s, and everyone wants to know, well, what's the big deal about this car? Well, it's not so much the car, but what's in the car. And if you've never seen the movie, I really highly recommend it. It's a little out there. What does help the movie, though, is it's got a great cast. Just an amazing cast. It's a good story. It's a fun story. It's an entertaining movie. But the soundtrack is outstanding. It's a little mix of punk rock music, some remixes of classic, rock and roll tunes. It's a great soundtrack. hell, owning the movie isn't enough. I really recommend owning the soundtrack. I mean, it has the, was it Secret Agent Man in Spanish? I mean, that is bad. I mean, that's badass. I love that. Like los secretos, no, los hombres secretos. Ugh, my Spanish is terrible, but no, it's a really great movie. I mean, and even though the movie is well over 30 years old, I mean, it's 35 years old actually. I think it's still one of my favorite movies. And I know, like the other day, I saw it on, it was on cable, or not cable, satellite. It was on TV, and I basically just left it on and just watched it. I mean, I've seen this movie dozens of times, and still, it's one of those movies that I could just sit and watch over and over again because it's just awesome. Now, along those lines, I decided to go back and watch some other movies that cult classics that I did. I even did a list of cult classics from the '80s, which if you go back on my list, you'll see great cult classics of the '80s, and of course Repo Man's on that list. Now, I remember when I was younger in the 1980s, back in the VCR days, I watched a film called It Came from Hollywood. Now, It Came from Hollywood is a compilation film, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a movie that shows movie clips from other movies. This one was kind of a comical one. It features Dan Aykroyd and John Candy, Cheech Chong, and Gilda Radner. And they basically talk about, films from the Hollywood of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So it goes into a little bit of the funny movies, the little crazy movies that they used to make, like some of the, large insect movies in the 1950s, the atomic zombie eras, or was it the atomic monster era is what I call it, and of course like the UFO movies that they made back then, which were actually Cold War metaphors. You also had like some of the strange genres they had, like teens in peril movies, movies about marijuana, blaxploitation movies, and the silly movies like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I enjoy this movie. I mean, it's not a real movie per se. It's just a compilation of various movies, but it's entertaining. It's fun. It's one of those movies that I could just put on in the background and just watch while I'm doing something else, because it's just fun. I mean, I love the interactions of the various, actor comedians, and just, it's hilarious. I mean, it's fun watching Cheech and Chong interact with each other. It's hilarious because those guys were awesome. The movie itself can be found on YouTube because the DVD that it was released on is essentially unavailable. I mean, it truly is the one movie that you cannot find because they only made a small number of copies, and it's, difficult. So if you're listening to this podcast or this little video cast and you happen to have a copy that you don't want anymore, let me know. I'm willing to offer, well, not too much for it, but I wouldn't mind having a copy of it. It's a fun movie I enjoy. Now, there was another one that came out roughly the same time, about the same time. It was called Terror in the Isles. Now, Terror in the Isles was a horror movie anthology or compilation movie hosted by Donald Pleasance and Karen Allen. And what it did was it focused on, scary movies, thrillers, and other, sci-fi horror films that were popular, and, showing you, like, what are the movies that used to scare people. The films go back to the 1930s with Bride of Frankenstein and, the Wolfman, and they go up to about 1983-84, which is when the this compilation movie came out. So, yeah, it does show you some of the scary bits of certain movies. I mean, it's not really scary per se. It's just, if anything, it just shows you the movies to check out, and they've got all the classics in there. They have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they have Halloween. But they also have like Psycho, and they have, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, those kind of films. There were some movies in there that I didn't recognize when I watched, and now that I've had a chance to rewatch it, I recognize virtually most of these movies now. I've seen most of them. I mean, there's a few that maybe eluded me, like movies like Clute and Play Misty for me, but those are movies that I can find, and I definitely need to check them out because those are movies from the 70s that definitely need to be checked out. Now, other topics I discussed on my weekly or the lists I've been doing. I had a list of cult classics from the 80s, which I mentioned, like Repo Man. I also did one on TV anthologies of the 1980s. Now, I remember in the 1980s, that was the cable TV era, so that's where you had, you don't have the hundreds of channels like you do now with satellite, but you had like about 30, 40, 50 channels to choose from. And I remember TV horror anthologies were one were TV shows I used to enjoy watching. Because I love sci-fi, I love horror. And back in the 1980s, you had some really good ones. You had Tales from the Crypt, you had Tales from the Dark Side, you had Monsters, you had The Hitchhiker on HBO, you had let's see, what's another good one? You had you had like the reboot of the Twilight Zone and a reboot of the Outer Limits. So these compilation shows or these anthologies basically took classic stories and turn them into some scary tales. And now, granted, these weren't on regular TV, so they couldn't be too graphic, which was odd because they actually had a show called Friday the 13th, the series, which didn't have anything to do with Jason Voorhees, but it was made by the same producer. So that one was more of a story about a antique store and haunted antiques, and they would look into the history or the background of the haunted antiques. And then you also had the Freddy's Nightmares, which lasted about 2 seasons, which was a little more Freddy centric, and actually had some pretty good actors appear in it. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it was definitely one that kind of stood out a little bit. So I mean, if anything, you could check out many of these anthologies on Shudder or on Amazon Prime or even Netflix. I mean, some of them are on there. I know Tales from the Dark Side is on there, and Tales from the Crypt is out there, and I think Monsters is as well. And of course, the classic Twilight Zone is usually you can usually find it along with Outer Limits. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about, as I get a little closer to the end, I have a good friend of mine that I wanted to talk about. She is setting up a little, a little, well, she's putting together some horror related items that she wants to get into. Her name is La Balana Winters, and she's a really good friend of mine. She is using her Instagram and on her Twitter. She's going to be working on a horror novel, and she's going to be helping to spread the word of artists who do artwork that's related to horror, because she really likes sharing that sort of thing and getting getting attention for people. So I wanted to do the same for her and give a shout out to her. I mean, she's an awesome person, fun to talk to. She really loves horror. I mean, she's like my sister. I mean, we communicate often, and I really wanted to give her a shout out. She's also going to be doing a podcast this week, so I'll probably put a link out there on my Twitter feed. It's Geeked Up Radio, and she's a great person to listen to and to and to communicate with. So, La Balana, this is for you. I definitely want to give you a shout out and speak well of you, because you're really awesome, and I wanted to help spread the word of the great things you're going to be doing for horror. So basically, that pretty much puts me towards the end of this broadcast. It's a short one, not too bad, because I've got to put together my list for tonight. And I just wanted to remind you that we are about 32 days away from Halloween, which means we're going to get a influx of Halloween-related items. I know, like today when I went to my grocery store, they already have all the, of course, I got all the Halloween stuff out there. I saw the monster cereals, the Frankenberry and the Boo Berry, and of course some other horror-themed or Halloween-themed cereals. And my particular grocery store chain does a big section on Dia de los Muertos, which, is pretty important in area I live in, which is South Texas, especially in the Hispanic community. And given the fact that my father passed away a few days before Halloween, and he was actually buried on Dia de los Muertos. So yeah, that's gonna be the 13th anniversary. Whoa, 13th anniversary of his passing. So yeah, it's gonna be because it's because my birthday is also in October. It's on the 17th, so it's 2 weeks before Halloween, and of course when Halloween approaches, of course that's the anniversary of my dad's passing. So that's always kind of a difficult time. I mean, I usually handle it okay, but knowing that he was buried on Dia de los Muertos basically was kind of symbolic, because it basically helps remember what a great memory he was. So for those of you who are listening, if your parents are still out there, hey, let them know how much you care about them. Don't ignore your parents, because there may come a time when they're not there anymore, and you definitely don't want to feel like or regret anything. So I mean, I get along with most of my family, pretty well. Yeah, well, yeah, generally it's better than most people, or at least okay, I guess. But so I just wanted to wish everyone well and encourage some horror movie watching, especially given that we're going to see an influx of horror movies on various networks out there. With especially on like Turner Classic Movies, and then and of course, Shudder's going to probably put out some good movies, and then Amazon Prime. Hopefully, Netflix does. I mean, seriously, Netflix, you got to put out more horror, or at least set up another streaming service, for horror movies. It'd be great to get some stuff like that. So, right, just want to wish you well, and I'll catch you later.